I will try to be clear this afternoon. I'm sorry, obviously, I was not very clear this morning. I should just say that there is no way I am against diagnosis of children at an early age. I'm very pro it, so I'm not quite sure how that misunderstanding arose. But in any case, I will try to be clear this afternoon. As I did mention this morning, people with autism need a 24-hour curriculum. In other words, what they have to learn, and they have to learn far more than most of us, because we have a natural instinctual endowment of many social things. It has always been ironical to me that we accuse people with autism of having no theory of mind. But of course, they are the only people who need a theory of mind. The rest of us have an instinct of mind. We sense how people feel. We have emotional ways of getting through and understanding other people. Unless we are talking about people with autism. Because, of course, when we deal with autism, we deal with a mutual problem. We have natural empathy for people whom we understand. And in my experience, people with autism also develop empathy when they understand. The barrier to empathy is not understanding. It is only if you don't know what people are thinking or feeling, when you don't understand that, it is very hard to empathize. So when we are faced with people with autism, we are in exactly the same position as they are with us. They do not understand us, but equally, we do not understand them. So we have a mutual problem. We have to work together in order to be successful. But as I said this morning, a lot of the things they need to learn happen throughout the day, throughout their lives. They are not just academic things. So, because neither parents nor professionals are equipped just naturally to understand autism, we have to do it just as they do. We have to learn about it cognitively. That's why it's so hard either to parent or to be a professional with people with autism, because it is not enough just to know about the individual. We have to understand about autism so we can understand the individual through that lens. We can tell ourselves that this behavior may not have its normal, typical meaning. It may mean something different because it comes from autism. And because we're having to do that, our behavior is often a little challenging for people with autism, just as theirs is with us. We both do things that set us off on wrong paths. So we have to have a learning task together. And neither parents nor professionals can work on their own. We need that intermediary, which is the person with autism, to help us. The fundamental root of the differences in autism are the fact that for most of us, we are not alone in working out how the world works. We have social facilitation. The baby from a very early age knows that how to follow the gaze of his mother or his caregiver. You can hold something up to I never have a tool. We wouldn't normally be holding up this to a 5-month-old baby, but let us say we are. Look, baby, here's a microphone. The amazing thing about the 5-month-old baby is that he looks at what we're holding up. When you think about it, it's amazing, astounding. All the stimulation all around, how does the baby know that we are referring to what we are holding up? If he's typically developing, he just knows. We haven't taught him, but he knows. He has an instinctual reaction. He recognizes the holding up of things as a communicative gesture. So he knows what we are talking about is what we are holding up. If he has autism, and we start talking about this being a microphone, well, he may be looking at something totally different. He may be noticing that we have some nasal hairs or some wrinkles, and perhaps they are a microphone. How is he to know? We then say, oh, people with autism have idiosyncratic reference. Yes, because they don't know how to divide the world up. They have to try and work it out. Imagine trying to work out what things mean, what people are referring to, what they might do next, just by looking at their behavior. Even behaviorists would admit that is a very strange way to operate. Even Skinner had to give up on trying to bring up his baby like a behaviorist, because it doesn't work. We have a lot of instinctual endowment which enables us to interpret the world. You put a new exciting toy in front of a 15-month-old, something that maybe makes electronic noises and has lights and so on. What's the first thing that toddler does? He looks at the face of a trusted adult. He looks at his mother or whoever is there. And if mum is encouraging and smiley, the baby will go and play with the object. If mum looks disapproving or fearful, the baby will withdraw. Now, people with autism don't do that. Probably even if they did look at the mother's face, they would not be able to interpret what it meant. So whether they go and play with that object depends entirely on their natural temperament. Some people are very naturally inquisitive and go-getters. And if they have autism, they become the child with no boundaries. They become the child with no sense of danger. The child who's into everything, doing everything, dismantling everything, interpreting everything, making sense in their own way, but with no guidance as to what is safe, what is dangerous. If they are timid, then they become fearful. They are scared to interact. They don't interact much with the environment. They withdraw into themselves and do things within. And that's all because of their difficulty in understanding, having that natural endowment. Now, of course, we can help them, and they can help themselves, and use their natural intelligence, use their language, if it comes, to help build up that understanding. But they're doing it by themselves, and they're doing it cognitively, which is really hard. So many aspects of life that we can just learn without any effort. We don't even know how we know them. Those are the things that people with autism struggle with. So we have to try to associate these things for them, try to give them the cognitive ways. And just to show how these things last through life, I want to refer back to someone again that Adam mentioned this morning, Jessie Claiborne Park. Her mother wrote about her when she was 23 in one of the Chopra Mezebov books. And at that stage, Jessie hadn't developed her artistic talent to that extent. She had begun to draw. She now makes a living by selling her paintings. They're very striking paintings. But at that time, she hadn't, and she had a job in a sorting office, in a post office, sorting the mail, which is a nice job for people with autism, very precise and good. She lived at home with her parents, so her life was relatively content, but she wasn't happy. because she said that the people she worked with didn't like her, they weren't kind to her, they didn't say hello to her, they didn't smile at her, they didn't come and have coffee with her, so she was sad. Now, her mother worked in a university. She had some students who might need a project, so she gave them a project to follow her daughter. And the students followed her daughter and found, in fact, that people were smiling at Jessie. They were saying hello to Jessie, but Jessie didn't notice. Their social signals were not impinging. Jessie was looking at the way the light was shining on the leaves, or the way the ants were crawling up the trees, or the way the leaves were bending over, or all the many wonderful things in the world that the rest of us take no notice of were very important to Jessie. So we had to find, all the people there had to find some way of making those social signals noticeable for Jessie. Now, Jessie loves numbers. So they gave Jessie a golf counter. I don't know if you know what that is. It's just something where you can keep your tabs on how many hits you have to get the ball down the hole. Sport is very strange when you analyse it, isn't it? You know? As someone with autism said to me when we were watching a football game, why don't they just give them all their own ball? Kind of missed the point, but yeah, I could see what he meant. But anyway, Jessie loves numbers. So she was taught that she could give herself a number, give herself a point, record the point, every time she smiled back at someone who was smiling at her, or said hello back to someone who was saying hello. So now she had a reason for looking for these signals. And of course, it transformed her behavior. And once her behavior began to change, of course, everyone else's did. People had been getting fed up. They had thought, oh, she doesn't want friends. It's no point. You know, she takes no notice of us. She wants to be left alone, and leaving her. But once she began to be responsive, they became more responsive, and the whole situation changed. Now, she didn't develop bosom pals, but she didn't want that. She developed people who were kind to her, who sat with her, who occasionally asked her to go bowling with them or to go to the cinema. She had, in her terms, friends, and her life was transformed. So even though the core difficulty remained as she grew as an adult, there are ways of not making it affect your life by understanding that she can't naturally go around noticing social things, but we can make them important for them. So all the things that normally are intuitive, that we normally just pick up, those are the things we have to teach people with autism. How to communicate, not just a means of communicating, because there are many other groups that struggle with that, but it's the point of communicating. People with autism don't see the point. They don't understand why we have to communicate. Wendy Lawson, who's a very able person with autism, said, especially when she was a child, though it's still there now, she's 50, but when she was a child, if she was thirsty, she would get very angry with her family because they were not giving her a drink. Of course, she had not told them she was thirsty. She had not asked for a drink because she didn't know she had to. She thought if she was thirsty, they must know she was thirsty, and they were not giving her a drink because they were mean and horrible. And as I say, even today, she has to remind herself. Even today, she has to say, oh, you weren't there, Rita. I have to tell you, don't I? And I say, yes, you have to tell me. I wasn't there. I didn't see. I don't know. You have to tell me. But that's a hard message to understand when you haven't got an instinctual way to understand it. Social and emotional understanding. You know, that's so key. And it's key for us as well in understanding them. How to tune in to their world, how to understand how this individual, and each one is going to be different. That's why it's so difficult. And then the whole point about agency and relevance. I have a little anecdote I used to tell a lot to help explain about autism, but it was a true anecdote. And it was sent to me by a teacher who had been working with her class of children with autism on joint attention. You know, that crucial skill that we talked about with a 5-month-old baby. Knowing that you look where people look, you look where people point, and so on. And we always have to remember that joint attention is not just about vision, it's also about hearing. My friend Roz talks about when she was at school, she was in a mainstream school, and when she went to a lesson like history, for example, she would always have to have everything coloured the same so she knew they all belonged together, all the books and the various exercise books all had to have the same cover. And she had a mindset when she came into the history class, this was all about history. So she went to the history notebook, and that was history. One day in her history class, they were learning about Victoria and Albert. This was English history. We do these things, kings and queens. Anyway, she was learning about Victoria and Albert. In the middle of the teacher talking about Victoria and Albert, in this rather old building, the central heating system started to make gurgling noises. And the teacher said, oh, something's wrong with the central heating system again, those old pipes, and went on about it for a little bit. And then she went back to her lesson. Now, Roz does not understand, does not pay attention to the fact that the teacher's heard a noise, I've heard a noise, therefore when the teacher says something about the noise, it's about that noise. She doesn't realize that joint attention. So as far as Roz was concerned, that was all about history. So when she had an exam question about Victoria and Albert, she started writing about central heating systems. And she's very upset. How do you know, she said, what is history and what is not history? How do you know when the teacher's talking about what she's supposed to be talking about and when she's talking about something else? And the more people with autism challenge you, the more you realize, how do we know? We just do, don't we? We know because we're so alert to joint attention, of hearing, you know, if the phone rings and someone says, get that, we know what they're talking about. Because we're aware that we attend, they attend, we're attending to the same thing. Without that awareness, it's a very great puzzle. It's so difficult. So they have to learn about that. Oh, it's back to my anecdote, sorry. It's about agency. She was working on joint attention, this teacher. So she was getting children to pay attention when she looked somewhere, to look where she was looking, when she pointed, and to do the same themselves, to point things out to other people, to comment on things. And they're out for a walk in an English town where people had put out their bins where the rubbish collects, for the men to come round and collect them. And one of the bins, the lid had come off. And a squirrel had got inside and was pulling out the rubbish. And one of the children in the class pointed to the squirrel and said, oh, look, miss. Well, the teacher was thrilled. Here he was doing exactly what she had taught him to do, noticing things, pointing to them, commenting on them. Wonderful. But then he said, somebody has thrown away a perfectly good squirrel. It's kind of the perfectly good that makes it funny, isn't it? But actually, what hasn't he understood? He knows what a bin is for. It's logically possible, isn't it, that someone's got a squirrel in the pocket they don't want anymore and they've popped it in the bin. But none of us think that. As soon as we see the squirrel, we know that that squirrel is in charge of his own actions. We know it's not a puppet or a toy. We know that that squirrel has an intention, that he's doing that deliberately. But people with autism don't always know that. Think what a big difference it makes to how you understand the world. Think how many times you may make those kind of mistakes. And of course, most of the time, you won't be telling people what you are thinking, because most of the time we don't. So trying to see into the world of autism without that social facilitation, without those instinctual things to help them, understanding how much they have to learn, and learn like an academic lesson, makes you realize how stressful life must be and how much there is to learn. Okay. We also got to remember we're talking about a developmental disorder. Now, we all, of course, know that. At least we know the words, but we don't always stop to think what it means. Now, we have to remember that a lot of what you see, and we often attribute to autism, comes from the fact that they are adjusting to those differences. And sometimes the way they have compensated, the way they have adjusted, is not very good. But we still need to understand that adjustment if we are to help them. The classic thing comes from children who don't automatically look at you. Why don't people with autism look at you when you're talking to them? Because they don't get a nice warm glow when they look at the human face. They have an overactive amygdala, little structure in the brain, which connects the cognitive and the emotional aspects of the brain. And one of its roles in the life of the brain is to warn you of threat or danger. Now, if that's overactive, then people with autism see threat everywhere, especially in the face, which they do not have a natural way of understanding. So if they are made to look full in the face, especially in the eyes, they often find that not comforting, not helpful, but very, very stressful. Plus, they've often missed out on early mother-child interaction, not been able to participate, not through any fault of the mother, but because they've not been able to take part in that to and fro, which depends a lot on joint attention. So one of the things that babies learn in that interaction is how to modulate your levels of arousal. You know, you've got a mother who's been desperate to have a baby. Baby comes and she's right in its face, hello, darling, all that. And the baby has to back off, you know. Oh. Give mum a chance to calm down because this is too much. On the other hand, if mum has a postnatal depression, so she's not very active with her baby, then the baby has to work harder, has to lean forward more, make more contact. But usually, of course, it's just a wonderful dance between the pair, where the baby learns that sometimes you want an intense reaction, sometimes you need some less than that. So our arousal goes up and down. Nobody wants full arousal all the time or no arousal. But because people with autism haven't learnt that, then often that's what they get. They get full arousal or they get no arousal. Very hard to get it right. So what they learn to do, especially for that big full arousal, is to shut it off. When it's too much, they close down. What we need to do is to help them reach that middle state of not. But we don't do it by forcing eye contact. We need to do what we saw in the lovely videos today, this morning, of the work going on here in Geneva. What we need to do is to play with our children in ways that encourage looking without forcing it. If they're faced with a teacher who says, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," which many teachers do, then we get the opposite. We either get they cannot look at us, or they look at us, get that big level of arousal, and either it's painful or it stops them listening to us, because all they've got is that high arousal from having to look. There's a big difference between forcing and facilitation. We need to help them learn to look at us, to see meaning in looking for us, but not to make it a meaningless thing that they do for no good reason. And then secondary handicaps, or secondary challenges, as we heard that ought to be. So that a lot of the things that we see, sorry, excuse me, I have to adjust my posture. A lot of things we see are not themselves the problem, but they're secondary, because autism has kept them out of the very learning they need more of. So children with autism need more opportunities to play with other children, don't they? They need more chance to learn all the social skills they'll have to learn for life. They need more chance to practice all those role-play, wonderful situations. But as we all know, they usually get far less, because they're not good play partners. If they're lucky, they have a bossy little sister. I always try to say to parents, if you can get a bossy little sister, that's the best person you'll ever get. Little sisters do not give up. They will insist on you playing, and they will do it. But we can't all arrange bossy little sisters to order. So a lot of the time, other children give up on them, and they don't get much play. So we need to find ways of helping them play with other children. If we can do that, then of course, by playing with other children, getting pleasure from playing with other children, not doing it as a bit of work, but finding things they enjoy to do with other children, then they are increasing their social skills, they're increasing their communication, and actually they're also increasing their flexibility, because it's other people that make us more flexible. I used to live on my own in a little house. I still live on my own, but I used to live in a little house in Birmingham when my daughter lived in a town in England called York, which has a lot of flooding. And one day she came to stay with me because she was flooded out of her house, and she came with her 3 children and her husband and her dog. And it was okay for a while. It was nice to have my family around me. I didn't mind the babies bouncing on me in the morning. But my little house only had 1 bathroom. And so I needed to get ready to go to work, and there would be someone in it, or even worse, there would be someone who insisted on cumping me in it. And then they would talk to me about, you know, have you got old lady's hair? Yes, but I don't want to think about it now because I have to go out of that door, and so on. But I managed that. And then when I came home from work, I had to play hunt the cooking utensil because my daughter had put it somewhere strange. But the worst thing of all was my office, because I have an office management system which is known as the volcano method. And actually, it's been shown to be quite efficient because you can excavate at the right level. But of course, it doesn't work at all if little fingers have been through looking for paper. So the result of all that is that I got grumpy. And I began to moan to my daughter about everything. Till eventually she turned around and said, "For goodness sake, Mother, you've been living on your own too long. You're turning into a crabby old woman." Spot on. If you live on your own, you do things to suit yourself. Why wouldn't you? You have a pile of mess, but it's your mess. You know about it, you know what's there, it's not getting worse. Now, when I think about it, having around people I love makes all the compromises worth it, just about. But for people with autism, they're often not getting enough out of other people. They don't see the point of other people, especially other children. So they keep to their little routines. They keep to their piles of things they want to be their own because they don't understand where's the benefit. The more you can help them see that other people have a purpose, parents they can usually see because they get you things, you know, you need parents. But what are teachers for? You know, you're trying to work out how things work, and teachers come and talk to you, they stand near you, they hover, they do, oh. They make life so much more difficult. And other children, wow. Most people with autism do not like other children. Or children. My friend Roz still, and she's now in her 40s, she still is scared of them. Terrified of children. Just the unexpectedness of them, the fact that they invade your space, and the contamination. She has quite a lot of OCD features. So she doesn't like the fact that they might, you know, have hairs on you, they might touch you, they might... She cannot bear it. So there's another child that comes within near to her, I have to protect her from it. For their sake, as well as hers, because if they come in suddenly into her space, she would kick them. Not because she hates them, not because she's cruel or wants to hurt them, but because she's scared. And if they make her panic, she would knock them out. So the more we can accustom them to living with people, understanding them, and getting pleasure from people, the better it is. And as we said this morning, or as I said earlier on, autism is also a transactional disorder. It's about both of us. You know, can you have autism by yourself? It's a moot point, isn't it? Someone with autism on a desert island, how would you know? I don't think you would. It's in the interaction with other people that we see the autism. So it takes two of us to have autism, okay? The person with autism and us. And our reactions are just as important as theirs. We cannot fix them. We have to fix situations, difficult situations that we get into, and we both contribute to. Okay. So early education, very important, of course, and we've heard about that this morning, and a nice example of some going on. What we're going to judge as success, of course, depends on what you value in education, what do you want it for. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves, do the ends justify the means? I hope we would all come to the same conclusion. But sometimes you see children being put through some terrible things. And Adam talked a little bit about some of the awful things that have been gone on over the years, and sadly still go on to these days. Now, the awful thing about, you heard about the electric shock place. Now, when it came to light, this is what was happening, and I have to say that when the children went home at the weekends, which they did sometimes, it wasn't all the time they were allowed home, but when they went home, they came home with the electric shock apparatus so that the parents could continue giving their child electric shocks at home. Almost unbelievable, except that the parents were, when the authorities wanted to close the place down, it was the parents who protested. And you think, why? Why would the parents want their children to be treated like this? And the only reason I can think of, I'm sure it's not because they didn't love them, didn't want the best for them, is because somewhere along the line they were given so little help that when something came in, they were convinced that this was the only thing. And then they were terrified because, of course, by then, with all this inhuman treatment, the children were wild. The children were very difficult to manage. And the parents were terrified that they would have their children home and no support and no help. So it's not only for the children's sake we need to give early intervention and need to involve parents, but for the parents as well. Because whenever I've spoken to parents who have been doing what I would regard as not the best treatment, at the root of why they're doing it is often that fear. The fear of being on your own, not coping, not knowing what else to do, not knowing what's for the best. And we all do unwise things when we're scared and when we don't know what else to do. So we have to make sure that parents are not in that position. Okay. Right. Better gallop on. So what do we need from the care pathways? Well, we do need early intervention, early diagnosis, to get early intervention, as we heard this morning. It shouldn't be the case I've been on many committees that have come up with the conclusion that we shouldn't base services on diagnosis. That's not a good purpose for services. Diagnosis, unfortunately, is used because it's a supposedly objective way of allocating scarce resources. We haven't got enough to give everybody what they need, so we're just going to give some, and this is the mark. If you've got this diagnosis, you get it. If you haven't, you don't. But that's terrible. We shouldn't be waiting for diagnosis. We should be giving services for need. But that won't happen until we can improve people's understanding of autism, people's understanding that it's a society responsibility, not just responsibility of the parents who have the child, but of everybody, and that we would do best if we can do that. Okay, they should have specialist education as early as possible. In the UK, we have a terrible situation where children are put into mainstream first because it's cheaper. And they have to wait till they failed, and then they can show that they need the support. Terrible, terrible thing to do. Much harder to get them back into mainstream if they've had that bad experience. What we should be doing is giving them, if they're able to go into mainstream, fine. But we should be making sure they've got the skills and the capacities and the resilience to cope with mainstream, making sure the mainstream understands them and what to do, and then we've got a system that might be effective. And then they're going to need short breaks. It's very stressful, as we've heard this morning, to deal with a child with autism, however loving. And there are siblings. You know, children with autism can make lives of siblings very difficult. Most research shows that siblings benefit in the long run from having a child with autism. They often turn out to be wonderful, caring human beings. But living through it can still be hell. You know, many siblings of children with autism, you know, have all the time to face the issue of the dog ate my homework, except that it wasn't the dog, it was my sister or my brother or whatever. Very difficult. So they need a break. Parents need a break. Their offspring need a break. Their other children need a break. So they can do ordinary things that maybe they can't with the child with autism. And the child with autism needs a little independence, needs to learn how to function in other environments other than his family home as well. But certainly research I've done with students has shown that the main reason that parents don't even accept the help that's out there is they don't trust it. They don't trust other people to look after their child or feel that they will understand them. So again, we have to build up that expertise. And then we need to remember that children grow up and they'll become adults and they'll have adult needs. They won't go away. We need to provide them. Some we hope will lead fairly independent lives and need minimal help. But at the very least, they're going to need understanding and somewhere to turn to, some level of support. And we need to have those things in hand. Okay. All research on any successful program shows that they're ones that parents are involved. If parents are not involved, then the programs tend not to be so successful. And of course, parents inevitably have to manage their own child. They don't all want to be teachers, as we've heard, but they all have to be there managing their child. How much better that they know how to manage their child effectively and in a way that is not stressful, if we can manage that. So that's why parents need training, as Teo said. But again, as someone else pointed out this morning, there are issues of capacity and stress. Not all families can cope with as much as somebody else. And I learned very much that it's hard to make objective measures of who needs the most help. I once taught autistic triplets. And the mother of the three children, who were very, very difficult, I have to say. They weren't easy children with autism. They were all quite interesting, difficult children. And there was a little sister, 2 years older. Now, this mother had not even taken them for any help, till she presented them at 4 years old to a nursery school, and the nursery school took a very different attitude to it, and immediately, you know, she had to go and get diagnosis and so on. But her attitude to her children, she was of Spanish origin, which probably had something to do with it, was that she thought she was late getting married. She said she thought she was on the shelf, and then God blessed her by giving her a husband and then children. So who was she to complain? She just got on with it, and she's maintained that wonderful attitude all through her children's lives. She was a tremendous mother. In the same class, I had a little girl who was a sweet little, typical autistic in a way, but very undemanding in my terms. She would pull down a few things from the walls and throw a few jigsaws in the air, but she was a sweet, happy little girl, and it was easy to entertain her. Yet she was the child at 7 years old that ended up in institutional care. Her parents were quiet, intellectual, bookish people, and I think an ordinary boisterous toddler would have upset them. Their idea of a child was a nice, quiet, poetry-reading child sitting in the corner. And they couldn't cope with this, in their view, wild child. Now, it's not to condemn them, but to condemn ourselves that we didn't see. We looked at these, you know, triplets and thought, oh, poor parents. But we looked at this little girl and couldn't understand that for that family, they couldn't cope. We need to have a better understanding of what makes resilience. Okay. And of course, parents can be involved at different levels. Parents as co-therapists is the TEACH model, which we'll hear about later, is very much, I think, to be, you know, a good way forward. But in some situations, they're just managers of therapy, which I think is one of the most stressful things to be. There are a lot of home-based treatments, and again, they vary very much on how much demand. For one period of my life, I was a researcher doing, one of the things we had to look at was how effective it was. One of those daft research projects, well funded by our National Health Service at the time, and it was about who did best. If you trained the parents, or you trained the teachers, or you trained the teachers and the parents, or you didn't train anybody. Now, it's one of those research projects, you knew the answer before you started, didn't you? You know, it's obvious who was going to do best. So it was a waste of money, really. But I used to be involved going around London flats with people in very deprived situations, with very disabled children. And I didn't have the heart to make them do it, because I had children of my own, and I already knew the pressures that you had. Whereas my younger colleagues, straight from psychology classes, were much better at making parents do things with their child. And I always remember my psychiatrist who was running the project talking to a parent, and she was asking for more help. And he said, but Rita comes round to you every Friday. And she said, oh yes, but she just comes for a chat. So I thought, well, yes, I'm not succeeding here in making, but sometimes you feel that child is not going to improve enough to make it worth this parent putting all that effort in and neglecting things. So it's a difficult issue. Okay. Finish? Okay, 5 minutes, okay. So education's got a dual role in autism. It's got the same role that it has for any other child. Children with autism are just as entitled as any other child to a broad and relevant curriculum. They need to know the skills, the knowledge, the understanding that enables them to participate as a citizen. That's what we want for all our children, and children with autism as well. The issue then just is how can we get meaningful access, how it's not tokenism, but they're really understanding these things. But they also need therapy. I don't just mean necessarily by therapists, but they need a therapeutic role to the education. In other words, the education needs to address all those fundamental difficulties which other children don't need to learn. So we need to start as early as possible, and we heard this morning about early Denver model, one of the ones that's, you know, going around the world based on a lot of the stuff that Sally Rogers did. And again, you know, even the ABA, the discrete trials ABA, the low-VAS version, which I'm not terribly pro on, But if you look at that another way, one of the things that Lovas did, he didn't just do that methodology, but what he also did was choose children who were near nursery schools that would accept them. And if that situation didn't happen, they didn't form part of his group. And what he did was focus on the skills they needed in order to operate in that mainstream nursery and to reduce the behaviours that might stop them getting into that mainstream nursery. Such a sensible thing to do. And yet that aspect of his study has never been taken up. But to me, it was a good aspect of what you need to do. And the children who did best in his program were those who got early access to that mainstream nursery. So maybe it was that did the thing, rather than sitting down doing the discrete trials all day. So we need to think about it. Okay, I've done that one. And again, parents need, we've heard all this, that you need, they need support from other parents. I suppose that's the strongest thing I would say. In my experience, professionals can tell parents things till they're blue in the face, but parents only really believe them when another parent tells them. Because, just as we discussed this morning, it's very hard for us professionals to really understand how parents are feeling. They hear it from another parent and they know that they know. They've walked in their shoes and they know. Well, a lot of things we do to encourage diaries. We've heard about joint goal setting, very important. I can't do it, can I? Anxiety goes across the curriculum and goes across the home situation. In my experience, parents and professionals work well together when the child's doing well. We're all happy when the child's doing well. We're quite happy to praise other people, praise ourselves, feel good about ourselves. It's when something goes wrong, when the child's showing difficult behavior, when he's not succeeding where we hoped he would, that's when we start blaming one another. So that's when we have to be extra careful to work as hard as we can. And so what we need to do, one of the key things we need to do always is to remember that the child is going to be affected by the whole 24 hours. It's not going to be a school problem. It's not going to be a home problem. Even if that's where you're seeing the problem's going to have built up either in the school, coming out in the home, or the other way around. So we have to work together to resolve it. And I'm very sorry, I'm such a terrible timekeeper. But one thing I would like you to go with, especially if you're a professional, that professionals seem to me, especially in schools, to get obsessed with the idea that we can't do anything special for children with autism because we have to treat everybody the same. Rubbish, rubbish, rubbish. Treating everybody the same, treating people equally, doesn't mean that. If you're treating everybody the same, you're being discriminatory. That's against any legislation you have against anti-discrimination, because equality means you have equality of opportunity. And in order to give people equal opportunities, you have to treat people differently. That's what we're after. Thank you. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay.